Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out and
in a week, Macedonians will go to the polls and be faced with a stark choice between two competing visions. On the one hand, there is Zoran Zaev and his Socialist Party, SDSS, which has ruled Macedonia for the past 3 years. On the other hand, there is Hristijan Mickoski, the relatively new leader of the center-right VMRO-DPMNE. Zaev and his socialists ignored the will of the Macedonian people, the consent of the governed, and essentially used violent means to change Macedonia's constitution, in turn changing Macedonia's name, identity, heritage, history, culture, and much else about Macedonia that made Macedonia unique. The socialists saw their crown jewel, the Special Prosecutor's Office, end in disgrace with the chief prosecutor in jail, the office in shambles. Meanwhile, numerous scandals have rocked the government. The economy has not delivered, and the coronavirus runs rampant, with one of the highest rates of death per million in the region. On the plus side, quote, North, unquote, Macedonia is now a member of NATO, which French President Macron called, quote, brain dead, unquote, last year. The center-right of VMRO-DPMNE faces its own test, with relatively new leadership and a slate of parliamentary candidates relatively unknown. It is promising to implement traditional center-right policy, focusing on jobs in the economy, rule of law, stability and security, and a restoration of Macedonia's pride and spirit. They are also promising to undo the so-called Prespa agreement in due course. While many may not like either party and those smaller parties that support them, the fact remains. One of these parties will win, and one man will be the next Macedonian Prime Minister. We'll discuss all of this and more in this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains, fire-free, in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin calling in from Skopje, Macedonia.
There, very good. No added adjectives to Skopje, Macedonia. So that means you're totally focused right now on these elections, I'm sure.
Yeah, the fever is high.
It's the silly season, as we say.
Yeah.
So, hey, you had a debate between Mickoski and Zaev last night. First of all, is there going to be another debate before the elections?
Probably not.
Probably not,
As
okay.
things stand, not.
We're recording this on Wednesday, what is today? July 7. The elections are Wednesday. No, we're recording this on Tuesday, July 7. Well, this will drop tomorrow, Wednesday. Elections will then be a week from now.
I forget which month it is, honestly.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Yeah, it's can I have a refund on 2020? But anyway, so the two men had a debate last night. How'd it go?
It was unwatchable. I couldn't. I mean, honestly, it's just such a difference in class. It's like two completely different sports. Two persons who trained one who trained in classic boxing and another who trained in, by the book, by the rules, and another who, tries to bite you on the leg while you're not looking. So it was really ugly. Zaev is very ugly, very... they've trained him for this. I mean, he's not...
He's a
People would
Sayak.
tell me that... He's what?
He's a Sayak, right?
Yeah, he's a Syriac. He's a total Syriac. But even, people would tell me that he's personally amicable, but he's being trained to be a turbo Syriac, which is the famous turbo folk Syriac
good.
from Ramba Amadeus, the famous phrase. So he was really, trying to make the entire thing unwatchable, and he succeeded for me. I mean, people would just tune out, and Mickoski this morning said, listen, we can't talk like this. I have to apologize like 9 times. I have to remind him that he's lying on a thing that he's obviously lying about, and it just, he doesn't flinch when you remind him that the thing he's saying is completely false. So he tried to blame Vimero for the racket scandal, like they were, like Katica Janeva is part of Vimero, and Jordan Kamchov as well. So it was just
sounds like a man losing
incredible.
his grip on reality.
No, he was trained. He was, just give the biggest whopper of a lie and hope enough of your people believe it, and enough of your people will lap it up and just move along. He was pointing his finger at Mickovsky for the scandal, for example, in which has Zaev's fingerprints all over it, and Zaev's favorite prosecutor perpetrating it, and Zaev's second favorite prosecutor kind of investigating it, but not really, to make sure it doesn't get to him, the investigation. So,
Yeah.
and then he has the goal, after being caught in this situation, to just say, well, I reported it. Mickovsky says, okay, where is the report? There is nothing in the law says you have to have a written report when the prime minister calls a chief prosecutor and reports a huge crime about another top prosecutor. It doesn't have to be there. Doesn't have to be a written trail, as I've said, and he's like agitated about this. So he's even trying to be proud and in your face about the issue. So I watched it for like 10 minutes and then just decided, okay, I'll just get it through the Twitters and the news reports. I don't have to
That bad,
subject myself to this. Yeah.
Wow.
Super ugly.
Wow. Did you watch it with a refreshing beverage like a bottle of industrial cleaner?
No, yeah, I don't want it to end in my TV, so I just.
Oh well, okay. So we've got, this is the second, probably the final debate, as you say, and we've got a rash of competing polls out there from both sides, and obviously they tell opposite stories. One poll commissioned by Zaev, his party, and NDI, the National Democratic Institute, which is a U.S.-based institution, has no surprise Syriza winning. The poll that I don't know if Vumero actually paid for it or if it was IRI, I can't remember, but McLaughlin Associates.
Yeah, Vumero paid for McLaughlin.
Okay, yeah, it obviously shows the Vumero winning. Are there any other polls out there that we should be aware of?
There was one more which said the same thing as NDI, which had SDSM winning, but Brima Galupa apparently did it, but then Brima said they did not do it. And then they said, okay, we did it, but we can discuss what we did for whom and how it was done and who was the person who... Yeah, so they made the whole mess out of it. And then today there is an IPIS poll which says pretty much what... they're lean Vumero, so they say pretty much what the McLaughlin guy said. There is no IRI poll, which was usually the gold standard, but basically there is... we have no reliable poll. The only reliable thing we have going is that Zaev is very determined and set on having... on winning the 6th district, beating Dui. And this is the majority Albanian district. He keeps talking about this. So this would make him, in his mind, the winner among ethnic Albanians, even though that's bogus because in the 6th district there is like 1/3 of the voters are Macedonians and they would be split Vumero and SDSM. So if Zaev beats Dui, it would be owing to Macedonian voters, but he would declare himself the winner in the Albanian district, therefore the biggest Albanian party. And even if he loses every other district, which is very likely, especially according to the McLaughlin poll and the IPIS poll, he would still say, okay, Dui is not the biggest party, I am the biggest Albanian party. So he would then go to what we discussed last time, his offer to Mickovsky that, as the biggest Albanian party, he should be in coalition with Vumero, not Dui or the alliance, even if Vumero is like just 4 or 5 seats shy of a majority and only needs a small Albanian party where they could divide the seats in government much more favorably. SDSM would obviously demand like an even split. But this is what Zaev keeps talking about, and this is indicative of him uh, losing the election overall, but trying to take Dewey's role. But he then the next day he goes out and says he would still like to form a coalition with Dewey. Ali Ahmeti comes out and says Zaev is a drunkard.
I
He
saw
calls
that.
me on the phone. He sings the Albanian anthem. No, so Ahmeti is trying to humiliate Zaev as much as he can.
Excellent.
But then the next day Ahmeti says, well, yeah, but I would still prefer to form a coalition with him because,
the drunkard.
he's such a because he's such a pushover, obviously,
Sure.
and Vemero would have the legitimacy of the Macedonian people and hold me by the shorts. And so it's very, Vemero will definitely win the two eastern districts where there are no Albanians, the third and the fourth. The fourth is Zaev's own district, so he would definitely lose it. He has Albanians in the first, second, and the fifth district, which could help him even it out or lose by a small margin. But it depends on how Dewey is able to get the Albanian voters, to what extent, and how they break. If the U.S. Embassy gets involved in the last minute and orders Albanians to vote for SDSM like they did the last time. So basically it would be more or less even in these three districts, but Vemero would still win, although not build up a difference like I expect them to do in the third and the fourth district. And then in the sixth, that's the last chance for Zaev. If he beats Dewey, then he can claim he's the biggest Albanian. He's more Albanian than Ahmeti. And if he loses to Dewey and the polls show him losing third place, losing both to Dewey and the alliance in the sixth district, then it's game over for him for real. Then it would be very bad for him. Then only the diplomats can save him.
Wow. Okay. Well, then that's Alex. I'll take option number 3 for 400. So Zaev. There's a lot to unpack in what you just said, and that's a very good analysis. Thank you for our listeners. Zaev wants to be the king of the Albanians, which is an odd thing when you consider it. But now, a couple of things on the polling and election day itself that kind of mix this whole thing up. First of all, you've got the coronavirus. So another 5 deaths today, 70 or 80 more infections. One of the highest rates of death rates per million in the region. I think you're at about, Macedonia's at about 355 deaths total. So quick math would be, 175 per million, approaching 200 per million. To put that in perspective, you're nowhere. To make you feel better, somewhat. New York is 1,600 per million, so you're nowhere near.
Yeah. It's not a big deal, but
but you've got the coronavirus.
But it's scary.
Yeah, people are going to be justifiably, perhaps, a bit skittish about going out and standing in line and whatnot. Even though the government has said it's going to put in protocols for safety and all that, blah blah blah. But still, people have fears about that. So that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, again, July 15, a Wednesday. This is just a strange day to have an election. Normally it's on a Sunday. I don't know if that's going to affect it. Probably much less than the coronavirus. Number three, polling post-Brexit, post-Trump around the world is just, you take this with a large, a cowlick of salt, because nobody predicted Trump would win, nobody predicted Brexit. And so, the polls are a useful guide, I guess, and of course, as they say, the only poll that matters is the one on Election Day. So, we'll see, I guess. Stevo Pendorovsky kind of comes to mind right now. Has he been active, or has he said much during this campaign season?
No, he was mostly absent. I just saw him show up at the U.S. Embassy. They had Hamilton viewing, like the first event.
Oh.
So interesting that the U.S. ambassador is inviting the neutral figure, but not Zaev. I still expect them to make some move before the elections.
Of course.
Like an even more open endorsement of Zaev, besides taking pictures with Venko Filipčak, who is now campaigning for SDSM, the healthcare minister, and besides helping Zaev get his favored date in elections as soon as possible. But no, honestly, Stevo, he's trying to. he helped, obviously, Zaev, by fine-tuning the states of emergency, like 2 days here, then a break, then 5 days. Then it was such a ridiculous mess. But yeah, he's not openly campaigning, even of campaign for Vimera, but lightly, not overly exposing himself. Well, Stevo has been out of the picture.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the ambassador had Stevo up there for the screening of Hamilton. I assume that's the Disney version that just came out. And we have this debate going on here, obviously, over so much of our history. It's not actually a debate about statues or the Confederacy or Lincoln or Jefferson or Washington. It's about raw power, but that's another subject for another day. But I did watch Ambassador Burns' little event on Calais on July 4, and what struck me was that every fifth word that in her little spiel was about diversity.
Yep.
Whereas, President Trump talked about unity, despite what the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN said. They're living in two different realities, of course. But then she played. She had a couple of quote unquote American songs. Of course, "When the Saints Come Marching In" is classic American. I think they played the Star Spangled Banner, but then they played, this is the first time I had ever heard about it. The National Black Anthem, or is that what it's called? What's the title of it?
Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Okay, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Apparently, it's over 100 years old, or nearly 100 years old. But and then after that, then I started seeing it everywhere, of course, as one does. And the NFL, the National Football League, apparently is talking about playing that song before the Star Spangled Banner, the national anthem, when they finally start up, whenever they do. But, and of course, then there have been calls to make John Lennon's Imagine, as we talked about last week, the national anthem, and scrap the Star Spangled Banner, etc. But you can't have two national anthems for a country. That's a recipe for disaster.
Won't be one country for long.
Yeah, exactly, right. So, I don't know where that's leading. I know there have been calls. We continually see calls in Macedonia for a change in the national anthem there, change in the flag again. We already changed the name. Coat of arms. This continual erosion. Sorry?
The coat of arms, I'm okay with.
You're okay with? Okay, yeah. Take the red star off. Did they? They finally did.
We did that. Gruevski did that, but the rest remains this socialist-style coat of arms.
Right. Okay. But the latest call, of course, is for the change in the national anthem there, correct? Or the national hymn, as you call it.
Yeah, because it just it focuses on the Macedonians, not on the Albanians, and Albanians perform the Albanian anthem, and if we are to believe Ahmeti Zaev sang it to him on the phone, and it just dawned on me that this might be the biggest tape about to drop about Zaev. If Ahmeti recorded him singing the Albanian anthem on the phone and just wants to play it before the elections.
Oh, now that would be funny.
Yeah, but everything is problematic. Hamilton is problematic because he was apparently bought and sold slaves. The U.S. anthem is problematic, and it was really shocking. I didn't know about this song either until the morning of the event on Kala when I read the same article you did about the NFL, and then I watched just bits of the Kala event, and I hear the announcer says, and now. She didn't say Black National Anthem, but she said, lift every voice and sing. And it dawned on me that the U.S. Embassy has actually officialized the second despair anthem. And the next, the Hispanos are going to ask for, La Cucaracha to be made the national anthem of the U.S. And the Poles and the Italians are going to ask for some song. And this is not a unified country. The embassy already had the... LGBT flag on one of its windows. They no longer raise it on the mast, but they did the window thing, and nobody took a knee. I didn't notice a knee taking during the whole thing, but it's still early. It's still doable. It's still possible it happens. So
Yeah.
it's a complete, the embassies are completely, siding with the BLM, no matter
Oh
what
yeah.
Trump says.
Oh, of course. The State Department is a leftist organization, a far left Jacobin operation. Everybody in there is part of the revolution,
Mm.
not understanding that eventually the revolution will come for them as well. Um, but this is the Macedonian Content Farmers podcast, so let's. It's always fun to talk about how not fun. I shouldn't say that. That's making too light of it. It's always fascinating to talk about how the U.S. is falling apart, and the rest of the world will fall apart with it when that happens. But
Mm.
for the meantime, we got elections coming up. Macedonians, obviously, the name is vital. We've talked about this, and I've written about this before. How identity is a national security issue, and once you erode the identity, uh, the country itself is quite vulnerable to
Mm.
nefarious forces, both inside and outside. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I still think most Macedonians are going to be voting, even though they're passionate, they're Macedonians, they're patriots, they care about the name and the identity and the history and the heritage and the culture and so much more that is under attack and has been under attack for the past 3 years under Zoran Zaev and Ali Ahmeti and the U.S. and other Western embassies. Despite all of that, Macedonians, I think, are still going to vote on bread and butter issues, the
Mm.
economy, jobs, education, healthcare, security. Those are the main issues. And as I wrote about in the article the other week, I think the reason, my theory is that, for the average Macedonian in the Republic, day in and day out, they don't see the N word. They don't encounter it much. They're
Mm.
just talking about Macedonia and Macedonians and Macedonian things and all that. And they're teaching their children Macedonian history and all that. So it on a daily basis, the N word doesn't really affect them, and I get that they just don't encounter it, and that's normal. That's what we would expect. But it's important because I keep this updated list of
Mm.
instances where the mainstream media, think tanks, academia, diplomats, etc., call Macedonians quote North Macedonians unquote, and things that are should be Macedonian quote North Macedonian unquote, and that is vital. But again, I think most people are going to vote on those issues I just mentioned. Am I wrong? Am I right? What do you think?
Yeah, I guess, the SDSM government borrowed so much money, and they're not giving it to companies that much to support, the companies who've been struggling. They're focusing it much more on welfare transfers to get, literally to buy voters. And, if the embassy can do some trickery with the ethnic Albanians on election day, the trickery which SDSM can do on their own among ethnic Macedonians is just promising public sector jobs for people who are somewhere in the middle. And the polls did show that about half the people would not declare who they want to vote for, or
Oh yeah.
they will not vote at all. So this is where SDSM can act and just abuse the public funds to buy votes. Or there was even some leaks. Not sure about the authenticity, but I'm sure that's being done, trying to discourage known, hardcore Vimero voters from voting if they have a public sector job. So you threaten them that they will be doing the COVID shift,
Mm.
in the hospital unless if they go vote on Wednesday. So this is. Zaev cannot offer a prosperity. He completely failed to bring any investment. He did hike the minimum wage, but that can cause more damage
Oh yeah.
than it
Well,
can
that's true.
help.
Yeah.
There are people being forced, being paid the minimum wage and then forced to give few thousand dinars back down to the actual, going wage in the business they're in the region they're in. So, but yeah, he borrowed a lot of money, and he will try to, paper over all the cracks, all the problems before the election. He was going to do it anyway, and the corona now is a huge excuse to do it even more. And whoever forms the next government will be in huge trouble financially once once the extent of the theft has been made clear.
Right. Yeah. Well. Yeah. And you mentioned those who haven't told the posters who they're going to vote for, and those
Mm,
uh, who said they won't vote. Of course, they can change their minds between now and then as well.
yeah.
So, and then let's transition, to scandals. We kind of briefly touched about that in the opening monologue. The scandals continue. More tapes will drop. Boki 13, his latest trial, I think, has been postponed until
Yeah.
later July, correct?
Yeah, after the elections, the judge made sure that the next appearance is on the 21st.
21st. There will be no more
Yeah.
outbursts from him
Uh,
in the courtroom
well, he
accusing
had
Zaev.
another. He went to testify before the prosecutor again. He can still do this
Ah,
if he wants to, and he can. He said he prepared 30 detailed charges against different people, and his lawyer can just leak them along with whatever Boki has kept as evidence, as wiretaps, as screenshots of Skype conversations,
hmm,
uh, and stuff like that. So he can still he can give a video statement from prison. That's easy. And one thing that was leaked, we're not sure if Boki did this. It's probably in his house. Um it happened yesterday. There is a video showing Katica Janeva, Boki, and a woman with a hairstyle which looks very much like Radmila Shekerinska. She's filmed from the back, and
mm-hmm.
they're sitting, having conversation, watching Boki's television in a house that is, tacky enough to be Boki's apartment in the suburb. So this dropped yesterday. Radmila Shekerinska, she refused to address it. She did not say it was me. It wasn't me.
Ah,
So people are joking. Well, feel free to deny it. You can say
sure.
it was Carrot Top or somebody else who looks like you from from the back. But that's one. That's problem. There are things like this. Previous recordings had Dan Donchev had this pro-Russian businessman in Montenegro
Oh,
who
yes.
took bribes, who paid bribes to Zaev, and Zaev apparently wanted more. So the guy was super annoyed over that. So there is corruption scandals, plundering the public healthcare.
Hmm.
Uh, at the time of Corona, this is especially, a touchy issue. Working with foreign businessmen, especially a pro-Russian one. And then there were tapes which were not criminal, but they showed Zaev brag that he controls the NGOs, which, controls the colored revolution people. This is very unnerving to them. This could discourage them to vote, or they have two other options, two other parties who born out of the colored revolution who are competing, so they can, if they vote, they can vote for any of them, not vote for Zaev, so this is basically the purpose of those leaks, in which Zaev is this boorish Silak. He's bragging about his finances. He says he has 8.5 million uh, in his own assets, and he has reported much, 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 much less than that in his, required property statement. So now Mickoski is essentially campaigning hard on vetting politicians, opening up their financial statements, ascertaining their actual worth, and then asking them to prove if they can, if they can explain how come they have millions and millions. Um, there is another tape which shows several thugs from Bitola, including one who is actually a businessman, who is the spotter. He does the bidding for Zaev. He's the guy who is officially awarded the business, but
Mm-hmm.
everybody knows that the money, the profits actually go to Vice Zaev, Zoran Zaev's brother.
Ah, yes.
So they're discussing, and the more thuggish person in the conversation says he's going to burn down a car owned by a Vimera guy in Bitola who was apparently talking a lot about the scandals about the contracts given to Vice Zaev through the large coal plant in Bitola. So basically, they said we're going to torch his car, and he says, I'm talking with Vice Zaev about this,
Mm-hmm.
and another family member of Zaev's says he approved it. So
Wow.
basically, literally talking like a mafia organization. They're talking about being in Strumica, they can take people out of prison in exchange for enough money. So this is, again, attributed to the Zaev family. They discuss how Vice Zaev decides who gets a marijuana growing license in Macedonia. So there was some guy, they say, who paid a lot of money but didn't get it. then got angry at Vice. So, a complete Sopranos style, mafia operation. And now we have some audio to back up what we all know has been going on with Zoran and Vice Zaev.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Probably forbidden.
Yeah.
If
Oh,
we're
yes.
talking Hamilton, it's probably cancelled by now.
Well, actually, I was total off Macedonian politics. I was listening to one of my podcasts yesterday. I think it was commentary with John Podhoretz and the conservative perspective from a Jewish standpoint.
Uh-huh.
They're talking about Hamilton and how that's probably going to be canceled now too,
Yeah.
just because they're not sufficiently woke. And the main guy that plays Hamilton is Hispanic, I believe. So
Yep.
anyway, the colorful revolutionaries here in America and the colorful revolutionaries there in Macedonia and the colorful revolutionaries everywhere, they're going to be, well, I guess the ones in Macedonia are learning that they've been played as fools, which they were to begin with, and they still are. Whether they'll learn from that, I doubt it. But I don't think they're going to turn on Zaev. I can't imagine that. They got too much of their personal pride, prestige, and power invested in him. And I think he still throws them some scraps here and there in the form of some money from the budget for their works. What else do we have to talk about? I mean,
it's
we've covered elections and scandals, and we could do deep dives into each one of these, but that's a bit too much.
it's just very satisfying and chicken coming home to roost situation that essentially, given how the State Department funded a good chunk of the colored revolution in Macedonia, that now they have probably caught the first and last train to play the Disney version of Hamilton before it's cancelled, or maybe take their children down Splash Mountain, which they did, which is great fun, and now it's also being cancelled. And
well, not entirely cancelled; it's being changed. So the Splash Mountain still exists. It's just based on a different story with a African American as the heroine, I believe. So.
And she's actually a very conservative heroine. She's a hard-working girl, doesn't want to take welfare. She wants to make up, be like. I actually had a semi-viral tweet once explaining how Princess Tiana is like a Trumpian role model. She opens up a restaurant in honor of her father who died fighting in World War I, and the key song is I'm almost there. I'm almost saved enough money working 3 jobs to open up the restaurant. So it's completely a very,
I like this.
We can do it. Small town, black, positive role model. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very, okay, it's not small town, it's New Orleans, of course.
Yeah.
But, I keep going on about this. I noticed huge difference between blacks in small towns where people still work and have families, and the ghetto where blacks, whites, Hispanics, it's horrible. That's big cities over there are such a mess.
Oh well, I mean, again, I know we keep going back between Macedonian issues and American issues here, but African Americans are traditionally much more conservative than you think, and then the mainstream media and others think. A lot of them are churchgoers. A lot of them believe, rightly, that marriage is between a man and a woman. A lot of them, they're hard workers. They are the backbone of families, especially in the South. Although, as you mentioned, too many of them are facing poverty and broken homes and things like that, which Black Lives Matter doesn't even address and won't address.
But
anyway,
hopefully, with all this coming to head of this cultural war in the U.S., you guys on the right start taking it more seriously. I mean, Trump was supposed to be like, okay, yes, now we get it, now we take it seriously. But realistically, what was he going to accomplish? And he didn't do much. Foreign policy, complete failure, and domestically, we're now realizing that it was nothing to write home about. But now that they are overreaching, hopefully as soon as these elections, you guys get more serious
Yeah.
about saving what's salvageable and then maybe helping the rest of the world.
Yes. Well, when I think, when it comes to foreign policy and America and Macedonia, which actually I started working on another column about that, after the election, I'll get it out there. I think the one thing we've learned, we all put a lot of hope in Trump vis-a-vis foreign policy, America's foreign policy towards Macedonia. And what we learned is, or what we confirmed is something that we probably should have all known from the beginning, and that is changing the State Department, the administrative state, the bureaucratic state, the managerial state, whatever you want to call it, the deep state, is not going to happen anytime soon, if at all. It just cannot be changed. It can't be reformed. The thing I think we need to work on, again, the State Department and American foreign policy towards Macedonia, is mitigating the damage that they can do. That's what Macedonian policy towards the State Department and those of us who care about Macedonia should be working on, is mitigating the damage that the U.S. State Department inflicts on Macedonia. Because it doesn't matter who is elected president, the State Department is going to do what the State Department wants to do. President, Republican, Democrat, be damned, it doesn't matter. And so how do we limit the damage that the State Department can do? And that's we're not gonna even scratch the surface in this podcast or any other podcast, but that's something I think that foreign policy elites and others in Macedonia and those outside of Macedonia that care about Macedonia should be thinking about, talking about, working on how to limit the damage that the State Department inflicts on Macedonia. Maybe we'll do a whole podcast on that at some point.
Yeah, definitely. We see what they have to pull out of their sleeve for these elections and what more tricks they have. And it's possible they stand behind a push to have a unified VMRO SDSM government, hoping to reel VMRO into accepting Prespa, by nominally being in charge of the government, but actually having Dimitrov run foreign policy and someone else, Shokerinska being European affairs. And they continue, get VMRO to do the business, investment attraction and infrastructure and things they're good at, while in a grand coalition in which SDSM would run foreign policy, and then by extension VMRO is subscribed to the Prespa Treaty. And it's very possible that this is what the embassy will try for, not get the Albanians to vote for SDSM, but actually maybe just a little bit, and then once the elections are over, pushes the two main parties into this coalition, which Zaev is already proposing. This is a very possible, clear danger after the elections.
Right. Yeah. And again, that's what you just said is what your thoughts are in terms of what the U.S. Embassy would be pushing the two main parties towards. I just don't see, and that's very, logical. What you just said. I don't, VMRO, I can't see ever accepting that. And again, I was reading an article earlier this morning. One of the Bulgarian MEPs, I can't remember which one, was saying that basically it's a binary choice in this upcoming Macedonian election, and he didn't say it specifically, but he implied that voting for VMRO is to go back 3 years, and voting for SDSM is to go forward into a bright European happy future. And that's just, it's not a binary choice like that. You can still, VMRO is still going to take the country forward if elected. It's just going to be a slightly different path. And again, basic fundamental human rights, like the right to your own name and the right to your identity, which is something that the State Department, that the European Union, that NATO refused to talk about, to address. Why? Number one, because their identities and their names are all secure. They're not under threat. And number two, they're much stronger. And number three, actually, at the end of the day, they don't actually care about names and identity because they're quote unquote citizens of the world, global citizens,
Yeah,
global globalists, and so they don't have much use for that in the first place. So they don't think you should either. But Macedonia can have its name, have its dignity, have its identity, its history, its culture, and pursue policies that make Macedonians richer, that bring jobs, that bring wealth creation. All of that can be achieved, but it takes an awful lot of work. And you know, the Citizens way is the lazy way. It's we're going to do what we're told, and we're going to get into the European Union. The European Union is going to make us rich, and none of that happens to be true.
Yeah. And to make things, even more bizarre, the member of parliament who said this, Ilhan
Yes.
He's a Turkish guy. He's not even Bulgarian, and he's Bulgarian Turkish.
Oh dear. Oh,
Yeah.
that's
crazy.
what I call ironic.
That's the Balkans, and it's coming to a theater near you. The way things are going.
Well, it's like I keep replaying this scene in my mind from the first Pirates, where Captain Barbossa tells Miss Swan, he says, what does he say? You better start believing in ghost stories, Missy, because you're living in one. It's kind of for the United States of America, you best start believing in balkanization because you're living in one. So
You might not be interested in the colored revolution, but the colored revolution is interested in you.
Yes, well, that's a paraphrase of Trotsky, who I love to paraphrase. You may not be interested in the Chinese Communist Party, but the Chinese Communist Party is interested in you, etc. That's always a fun
right.
All
So
right.
crazy.
It's
Okay,
morning
buddy.
here. I got to finish up here and get to the office. You need to get to work.
Do whatever you do.
Sorry?
Do whatever I do.
Do whatever it is you do. Yes, exactly. Do whatever I do, I still got a lot of people who think I work for the CIA, but that's okay. So,
No, we don't.
anyway.
Would you acknowledge it if you did? I mean, honestly.
No.
Of course.
I'm still waiting for that check, though. No, I don't see. If I work for the CIA, I still haven't got a check from them yet. I don't know where it's been.
Me from the KGB.
Oh, hey, it's a good thing we can laugh about this stuff.
Yeah.
When we can't laugh anymore, then we know we're pretty much dead. So.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Okay, buddy.
Let's we'll wrap this up. We will do another podcast before the elections. I'm not sure what day that'll drop. We're doing this again on Tuesday the 7th. It'll drop on Wednesday the 8th. We'll do another one, and then we'll see about a podcast on election day or the day after. Something just depends on how things go.
Yeah, keep the hope alive.
No, actually, as John Podord says at Commentary Magazine, keep the candle burning. I like that.
Good.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Okay, buddy. Take care.